my name is Berte, and I work for a company called Bitdefender. I've done a bunch of things over the years. I've been with the company for 15 years, which was a long time, and I work out of San Francisco. So every time I talk to somebody in San Francisco about 15 years working for a company, they're like 15 months, 15 weeks, because it just doesn't sound right, right? So it's just like, what are you doing? But I've done a bunch of interesting things, and some of the last stuff that we've been working on with the research team is we're doing a bunch of IoT research. We started off with consumer IoT research. We're just looking at, your baby monitors and smart plugs and so on. And then we moved on to more interesting things. And one of these stories is here today. And I hope you'll find it as interesting as it really was. So we're going to be talking photovoltaics. I'm taking a gander that you're interested in photovoltaics. So um, basically, this is last year's research. This is actual as ever. Um, oh, that's the let's go past that. So this basically, when we're talking about in general, when we're talking about the U.S. grid, everybody thinks that the biggest offender is the squirrel, because however many a time where we're talking about the grid, everybody was not thinking the cybersecurity was the biggest issue, but however, not whatever natural causes. So I have a couple of quotes here. We'll have the deputy director of the NSA that said, number one threat to data the grid is squirrels. So that's on record. We have a couple of other examples. The threat to the internet infrastructure service supporters may exceed the ones posed by cyber attacks. Squirrels mobilize, plot acts of cyber terrorism against humankind, and they're not acting alone. So this is all on record, and it's been proven correct up until at least today. And I've gone on podcasts, and I've gone on interviews talking about how OT in classical, let's say, like, we're talking nuclear plants, we're talking hydro, all these generation capabilities usually are very well air gapped from the internet and from the rest of the world. So supposedly they're going to be safer, and in truth, that's the case. Why we have squirrels as the number one cause? That's where we enter when solar enters the field. Now, um, it's undeniable why solar is making such an entrance in the space, particularly when we're talking about the grid. Is obviously the demand for green energy is there. Everybody, every government out there is putting as much effort as they can into fostering and increasing the generation of green energy, because obviously we need to reduce the carbon footprint and so on and so forth. And now in this particular case, solar has gotten so good at being efficient now. Like we're seeing, right, over 30% um, um, efficiency on the neo solar panels. They seem to last much longer, so on and so forth, and they're dirt cheap. Being dirt cheap also comes with some complications regarding their source. But just in 2023, and I think the number is pretty crazy for 2024, we've added 520 gigawatts of capacity, which is insane. If you think about it, that's worldwide. Now, of course, businesses and consumers both install solar panels at a forever increasing rate. You've probably went down to your local Lowe's, and there's this wonderful gentleman there at the entrance who's like, "Hi, let me sell you on a new photovoltaic system." And you don't want to upset him, and you're like, I'm just here to copy a key, man. Like I'm good. And then you just keep walking. But they're really aggressive because there's all these subsidies, and there's so much advantage, and there's so much reason to get photovoltaics. Why would you not, right? So with the growing numbers of systems, obviously there's more concern for attacks. So, obviously that begs the question. We're increasing capacity, we're increasing the number of vendors, we're increasing the number of systems available. How are we coping with security when it comes to this? So, as I said previously about, legacy systems, in the grid, photovoltaics are playing a different game. And I'm just gonna kind of preface this by saying, for our research team, photovoltaics look like baby monitors than anything else in terms of how they look like, or like, smart plugs or whatever have you, which is crazy to think about because it's the first time ever in our 10-year plus history of researching different devices that we were looking at something that um wasn't something that just maybe an annoyance in somebody's home or some sort of a PII concern, or whatever nuisance attack in somebody's household, but something that was much more menacing, and it really impacted much more than that. So obviously, there's just a different set of rules or lack thereof for these systems. So we looked like at a couple of manufacturers. We looked at Day and Solarman, and their management platforms to find out what's up. Why these guys? So both systems are smart. They can be controlled over the internet, and you're going to be saying, well, I mean, why? And at the same time, there's very good reasons why they're smart and connected to the internet, because most of these are not supposed to be managed by the individual, but it's supposed to be managed by some sort of an installer or a business that oversees multiple. And it makes a lot of sense because there's just so much cost reduction to managing stuff remotely. When stuff goes bad or something needs a little update or something, it just can be done remotely. So, um, um, we had one of these installations laying around incidentally, and somebody in the office noticed something fun about them. So, basically, in a nutshell, we could add an inverter from um, one in particular inverter for both Solarman and the Day apps, which was not necessarily expected. We just needed the serial number. So we're like, okay, let's see what's up. Let's see what's going on. So how did the attack happen? So here's the diagram of how the system looks like. So you'll see here, both ends, whatever. Um, Basically, the core is obviously the inverter. The inverter picks up the power from the panels, feeds it into the grid, or batteries, or whatever have you, and the system is at this point kind of just isolated there. However, in order to work, it needs to be connected to this thing called a logger, a data logger, which is the one below here, the stick logger. And the stick logger is basically the conduit that makes the whole system connected to the platform that later enables the end user or the business or the installer to be able to manage the system. Now, when we're talking about here is we're talking in general, we're talking about a system that's um, residential, something on your house, or a whole entire solar farm, like the one you could see on a hill somewhere. Now, you would think that the inverter, and if you read yesterday's news on Reuters, for example, about the inverters that um, researchers found radios in, unknown, undisclosed. I'm still looking into that. Not entirely sure what they're talking about. I have a good idea who to ask, but inverters in this particular case were not the cause of concern, which is surprising. The cause of concern wasn't the stick logger, which is the one that has the like Wi-Fi and everything that connects to the internet. But in this particular case, it was the platform, and it's even more ominous that way. So, logger is the bridge between the system, the inverter, and the grid. Settings and everything get pushed through it to the inverter. Inverter decides how much power needs to go through to the batteries or the grid in order to keep that working. Users, be it individuals or businesses, can control those using this conduit. Now you have a contractor that mounts the panels, sets up the inverters and the batteries. Um, Most installers require an internet connection. for the inverter to work, as I said earlier, um, it's for pushing settings and making updates and all this. Now the inverter um, is added to the business account for that specific platform as the and that's kind of the idea of the thing. And then the user can create an account if it's a residential or whatever. They'll put up the phone and they can see how much generation they have, how much they saved, how much went into the grid, so on and so forth. Again, why does the inverter need the internet? Well, it's maintenance, troubleshooting, firmware updates, reboots, grid settings. A lot of stuff can be solved using connectivity for this. It's fantastic, it's great, right? So what can go wrong? Um, the only this the caveat here, the only difference is that the user can monitor the system, but settings are mostly dedicated for the business setup. All right, let's look at the attack. So we're starting with a man in the middle attack, intercepting some requests from the Day Cloud app, and we basically only needed user certificates. We didn't need to patch the app, and we found suspicious login with some funny credentials that were hard coded. I don't know if you can see in there what the password is. So the user is smart configurator at Solarman, and the password is 12345. Um, okay, so let's keep looking. Um, and there's um, the account is used to get the information about the user devices, and it obtains various details such as the model, the password, the version, and the serial number. So this account is not linked to any account. So using it, we can get information about any installation, any inverter if we know the serial number, which is interesting. Um, so basically, what happens is when the logger is running, the it creates an access point that has an SSID that's in the form of AP as an access point underscore serial number. Very convenient, right? And until recently, and they changed that, the password was typically 1 through 8 and could not be changed. So, but now the password we can now obtain the password through a cloud, and that's all good. Um, Um, Basically, what we need to do to perform the attack is to find an access point that has a corresponding logger with a format, get the serial number, and use a hard-coded account to get the password, connect to the access point. A bunch of beautiful, heavy lifting question marks. So a lot of information is available, including by doing this, a lot of information can be retrieved. So users, home, network, Wi-Fi, passwords, and so on and so forth. Doing this attack is beautiful, but there's a bunch of downsides because it requires physical proximity. It has to be maintained, and you can only attack one device at a time. So there's unfortunately, as fun as war driving might be, this is not the most cool way to do it. So maybe we can do better. So let's look at some other platform features. Um, so like I said before, information for the end users is limited, but the business accounts can do more things, such as change settings and so on. So there's a search API that returns a data about all organizations and users if called. Now, um, on the front end, there you can only get the business name. So say the installer is like Solar something, but in the back end, there's emails, there's phone numbers, addresses, and other PIIs, which is really interesting. There's also a similar API for normal users. And basically, that's a screenshot of how the thing works. That's business names over there. Right. So what we're looking at here is, um, sorry, let's go back. So you get to see the IDs of the businesses and the details in the backend, as I said. So this in itself is not really a big deal, but it's still a PII issue. In fact, you can get this, but it also informed us about the number of businesses and number of users that might be affected, that that might be on the network. We need to keep these numbers in mind because we might find them interesting later. So what we're seeing here is about 3.5 million users and about 300,000 businesses. All right. As I said before, there's a similar platform between Solarman and Day. Up until a few months ago, Day ran on the Solarman platform, but then they built their own data center. They migrated the users, but it begs the question, are they still similar? And in fact, it turns out that they are very similar, in fact. Um, so similar that JWT from Day would work on Solarman. And it would grant access to the account with the same user ID, no problem. And since we have incremental user IDs, say 14 million on Day and 14 million on Solomon and 13 million on Day, we can cross-check over the 1.1 million accounts and basically um, have information about those. But can we do better? Well, obviously the tokens are used for authorization. How can we obtain them? For normal users, it's pretty easy. Send the email, the password, the hash password, and you get back the token. On the business side, there's a twist. Multiple organizations can be managed from the same account. So each org requires a token with different parameters. And after login, the account selects the organization and the token is created. The request is similar to a normal account. So you'll see the organization ID and group ID parameters used in the business account to the right. So using the same token obtained previously, a second request will get the list of the available organizations that are manageable. So on step 3, the token received in the first step, together with the organization IT, is basically the token created by the server has access to the business. The issue here is that in the third step, the endpoint that uses the data from the token in the post body, it creates a new token. So we tried changing the ID and the email, and it worked. They didn't need no signature checks, and they didn't even need an out none. So it was crazy that the endpoint didn't even need the header. So there we have the request with the manufacturer token on the left and the one we received. Let me know if you want me to go back for the photo. So tokens here look similar. The left is the one manufacturer with the back signature because we didn't have the key. But the one on the right was signed by the server, and it gave us access to any account that we wanted. So remember, we're talking about the ID and email combo. This time, all of the 3.5 million accounts were risking takeover. So what's the impact? Well, the first thing that we saw, I mean, fortunately, to their credit, they patched this 24 hours after reporting. And shortly after that, we've seen other vendors push patches. So we're seeing some screenshots here. I had a more comprehensive list, but it was all guesswork. Can't really tell because of the OEM chain is long, but multiple in the tens of manufacturers may have been impacted by the same issue. Now, when it comes to capacity, we're talking about, millions of users, obviously, um, but also multiple businesses that control multiple systems. Now, um, of course, the concern is, but one concern is PII. Having any sort of leak of user data of any kind from these is bad enough. Having emails, having GPS coordinates on their location, having their contact information, whatever have you, Wi-Fi, whatever. All of those are bad enough. But the biggest concern here was, obviously, the inverter's influence on the grid. And we learned from their own literature that these systems covered over 20% of the total world photovoltaic capacity. Now, we've been asked a number of times by, um, and again, just to be clear, we didn't really do anything stupid. We're kind of just guessing of the implications. But people have asked us a long time, okay, so what does this mean exactly? What can happen? So you remember the story with Spain just a few weeks ago? This is exactly what can happen. Um, that's not to say that what happened there. It's just the nature of um, solar generation and renewable generation that's not taken into account good sanitization when it comes to power generation that has a backup. So, for example, Australia seems to be doing a great job because they have batteries waiting there to take the load in case something happens. So, how can this happen? So, once you get access to the platform and you can make changes to the settings of the installation, you can instruct inverters to just, you know, play with the produce more than they should, generate more, put more power into the grid than they should, just a little bit. And at scale, that can, I don't know, I'm sure you know a lot about the grid, but it's very sensitive. I didn't believe it was so sensitive and so scary sensitive, and it needs so much balance. So anytime you make a change that's bad enough, that's just, you need to preserve that 60 hertz, and the plus minus one, and anything above or below is going to destabilize it. That's so easy to do. And it's so easy to do when you don't have the redundancy in the back there. So I added a timeline here of how we did it. Um, I mean, it's boring. Kudos to them. They patched really fast. They were responsive. All of this was in the cloud, so there's no CVEs. So it was something they could do. But however, sometimes it's not so quick, it's not so easy, and sometimes the vendors are feisty and stuff. So obviously we have some lessons here, obviously changing cryptography and material when you're OEMing things. I mean, obviously when you're building your own data center and stuff, and just a copy paste is probably not the best practice. So we saw that here, and we've seen it in other situations as well. In fact, working with other systems like the I keep saying baby monitors, but that's really a lot of that was our experience. Um, it's just a lot of OEMing, a lot of forward OEMing. Obviously, if I could get I met a golden fish and they gave me here's whatever a wish you want. If I could change anything, is that vendors all over the place in the entire world had a vulnerability responsible. And there's a slash security page or privates or something where they have like an email or a form with a PGP and all this stuff. And there's somebody there at the end of that email to reply into the next 24 hours, and we can talk to them and they're authorized and they know what to do, because we're always going to find vulnerabilities. That's not the concern. We're always going to be able to patch them. The concern is how to get to the vendors. Like, our biggest concern over the last 10 years was trying to get people to answer, then to patch, then, usually that's once we get in touch, we can solve things. But usually it takes multiple weeks to months. Some people have never applied, and I know I've stalked people on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on whatever, just to try to reach somebody at the particular company saying, hey, you need to answer because this is relevant. And then you talk to some random person who's like, oh yeah, you can tell me. No, I cannot. I need that exact person that can. So yeah, if I could just get anything to push, this would be it. And of course, for consumers, obviously, that's the different. Just try to keep things separate. So, in summary, I could probably zip through this, so everybody's going to get a lot of time back. But basically, the old adage of power generation is air gapped and safe is kind of obsolete today. Um, Large systems are vulnerable because they're connected, and because they're so various vendors doing various things, and I'm talking usually IoT, like we're thankfully seeing stuff like um the NIST, what is it called? Oh, forget the new labeling scheme. um Damn it. Anyway, so basically we have new schemes, labeling schemes, that are supposed to give kind of like a good or bad grading to different devices, IoT verified, stuff like that. So we're finally seeing these 10 years later, thank God. But they're pretty toothless at the beginning because they can make them too aggressive. So there's no implications if you do anything wrong. So ideally, they would have those. Um, but basically, like I said earlier, and I keep saying this is crazy. A lot of these systems, which are national security issues, look like baby monitors. So the implications are grave. Um, in this particular case, the impact was more than 20% of total solar power generation. And obviously, property and information was at risk. So, yeah, sorry, I kind of zipped through it so quick. I'm supposed to take another 10 minutes, but thanks for your attention. If you have any questions I might be able to answer, I'd love to. And thanks. And I'll pass the applause to my colleagues that did the hard work. So, yeah. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Hey, no questions is great, but yeah, actually, this is from my teaching career. Uh, and usually, when you're like asking people to say something, and like it's just like you don't need to ask people; they'll ask anyway. So I assume that you guys are fairly uh, um, exemplified by the work here. So thanks again. I hope you have a great rest of the show, of the con.